Why is it that in polite society it's generally not socially acceptable to criticize someone's religious beliefs? Why is it considered so distasteful to alienate or discriminate against someone based on their religious identity? It's just a system of beliefs, right? Not much different from political persuasions in the present day. Well, if the religiosity of various people really was just a belief system, lifestyle, and traditions, there would be no backlash whatsoever against the criticism of various faiths, or lack thereof, and people would switch between religions the same way they would switch between different political party registrations. The communities formed through various religious groups around the world go far beyond the aforementioned definitions that are usually given in mainstream society and transcend religious institutions in many ways, which is quite confusing for many Americans, at least since we're taught that ethnicity, language, religion, and race are all extremely disparate and unrelated topics, and that anyone of any nationality can have any of these traits. While this is technically true on paper, it's important not to ignore the reality of the situation, as it's easy to recognize the patterns between ancestry and religious affiliation, and we're not just talking about what name you call your god, as this also includes the traditions, practices, and folktales passed down throughout the generations that become the very basis of any given culture. First, we must establish that humans as a whole are undeniably tribal creatures. And when left to their own devices, for most of recorded history, it's easy to see how different groups have splintered, grouped together, and evolved over time to adapt to their given environments and different external stimuli. Animistic practices and/or ancestral veneration was practically the norm for most groups for nearly all of recorded human history, and these tribalistic ethno-religious practices are a ubiquitous trait of humanity dating millennium back for nearly every single group around the planet. Although the term pagan was formerly used interchangeably to describe practically any non-Abrahamic faith, for example, Hindus were once referred to as pagans, it's now used specifically in a modern context to refer to the traditional religions of Europe, with its current practitioners sometimes called neo-pagans or cultists, although more broadly, pagan is used in denotation of any traditional ethno-religious or polytheistic faith. Much like language, religious beliefs were traditionally heavily tied with notions of tribal kinship or larger ethnic affiliation, with different branches of a given people group often producing very similar theologies with the same or parallel deities, stories, and conventions that largely depended on their own group experience or interactions with other groups of people and nature. The most famous ancient deities known in the Western world, deriving from Norse, Greco-Roman, Slavic, and Celtic folklore, are all mostly related in some form or fashion, with Zeus arguably being analogous to Odin, Valhalla being analogous to Olympus or Elysium, and so on and so forth. Again, although several religions have claimed divine intervention or revelations in their founding, the traditions, holidays, customs, and many of the morals and values that were codified in their official doctrines stem from or were influenced by a previous faith. And although many like to deny it, this has clearly had a huge impact on the modern secular cultures that succeeded them. Clearly, this definitely depends on which culture one is a part of, as in some areas and communities of the planet, such as in Europe or China or even America, someone's religious background is something that has literally never crossed their mind before because it's such a trivial and unobtrusive part of their life. But like it or not, everyone's heritage is tied to some religion or belief. However, even if one doesn't acknowledge or isn't aware of the history of one's traditions and cultures, for instance, the celebration of religious holidays or certain cultural norms with religious roots, the impact is still seen in pretty much every nation over many generations. For instance, although many today associate the major holidays of the Western world, such as Christmas, Easter, or Halloween, with Christianity, these were actually appropriated from old pagan religions of Europe, and it's easy to see how the name Easter is actually derived from the Babylonian goddess of fertility, Ishtar, while Christmas was a Greco-Roman festival, the largest in fact, celebrating the winter solstice, and Halloween actually has no biblical origin whatsoever and was originally a Celtic pagan or Druid holiday from the British Isles. This doesn't take away from the validity or genuine meaning behind these holidays. It merely shows that cultural practices are incredibly difficult to wash away entirely. And I also discussed in my last video how even many pre-Abrahamic beliefs and practices of Middle Eastern religion, such as Zoroastrianism, were incorporated into Islam after their conquest over 1,000 years ago, perhaps in the same manner that pagan practices were adopted in Europe by Christian monks in order to compromise with the masses. If you're wondering what any of this has to do with ethnicity, well, ethnicity is clearly far more than just someone's ancestry, as this also includes the cultural heritage that comes with it. Although in certain Western countries, especially the English-speaking world, an emphasis is placed on assimilation, with the abandonment of one's traditional practices mostly being an unintentional consequence of said assimilation. In most other parts of the world, however, this is clearly not the case, as in most areas, one's national or ethnic background precedes pretty much any other factor, although in contrast, in other areas of the globe, religion is by far the most important defining factor of someone's identity, and this is easy to see just by talking to the average person from parts of Asia, Africa, or even some parts of Europe. In South Asia, the feud between Hindu and Islamic communities is pretty well known even outside of the region itself, with both sides accusing the other of being prejudiced and intolerant, with interfaith marriages still being rather uncommon in the region itself and among the diaspora. Although admittedly, this not only has to do with religious practices, but also extreme tensions brought about during and after the partition of India, and even back further to the Islamic invasion of the subcontinent. Traditional ethnic identifiers such as language or nationality have generally been transcended by religion and in the past caste or position in the social hierarchy, and today, regardless of physical appearance, traditional caste, or self-perceived race, South Asians are united and divided mostly on the basis of their traditional faith and would primarily identify as such, perhaps with the exception of identifying with their nationality first and foremost. And I would wish to more accurately reflect this in my future ethno-racial map of the world for next year, as who truly has more in common? 3 Punjabis of the Sikh, Muslim, and Hindu religions, or 3 Hindus who just so happen to belong to different parts of the country, such as a Bengali, Tamilian, and Marathi? I can't answer this question because I don't know the culture well enough, but I imagine it would be the latter. The situation is also seen in other parts of the world, such as Southeast Asia, especially in the Philippines and Indonesia, as well as the Horn of Africa, with religion often superseding other aspects, just as in the subcontinent. However, I wouldn't exactly classify these as ethno-religions, even though the two concepts of ethnicity and religion are very heavily linked in these parts of the planet. A true ethno-religion is one in which their ethnic and religious identity are one and the same. Some examples of ethno-religious communities right here in the USA would include American Jews, numbering second most numerous in the world after Israel, and I recently released a video where I explained the connection between various Jewish groups around the world and why they are thought of and act as both a religious and ethnic community, which again is quite confusing for many Americans, since in the eyes of many, you can change your religion, but you can't change your ethnicity, and these are very rigid rather than fluid identifiers. Another example that's almost always considered to be an ethno-religious community in America would be the Amish, descendants of a small group of Anabaptist German-speaking migrants from the 1800s with very unique properties to say the least. Well known for their rejection of mainstream society and technology, the Amish are quite successful despite this, growing in numbers from only a few thousand at the start of the 20th century to 1/3 today, and almost all of these modern members are in fact descendants of the original founders, as conversion to this religious community is quite rare to say the least, and this makes them one of the fastest growing groups in all of the United States, or even in the Western world. The Amish are such a tight-knit, family-oriented, independently minded community that they're one of the few groups in the US that, as a whole, are actually exempt from Social Security taxes, but are also ineligible for its benefits later in life, due to the fact that the Amish as a whole have decided to take care of their own elderly, and they do a pretty good job of it considering their life expectancy is actually nearly identical to that of the country as a whole, despite their unconventional lifestyle. Now, I've argued in the past that the Latter-day Saints functionally act as an ethnicity here in the United States, and for a group like the Mormons, it may seem like it's becoming a much more open faith, But as I went over in my video over the Mormon community, the Mormons descended from the old stock original Mormon pioneers of the 1800s, mostly through Americans from the Midwest, as well as immigrants from Northern Europe, are very close to acting as an ethno-religious group in many regards, although Mormons are conversely also well known for their very active missionary work, converting many not only around the country, but also the world. Over time, and we're talking several generations here, yes, we would start to see a gradual shift in the average gene pool of the Mormons of many different backgrounds and identifiable genetic markers more reminiscent of an ethno-religious group due to endogamy within the faith, similar to Judaism, but due to current trends of conversion in and out of the faith, as well as intermarriage, it's unknown if this could actually happen or not. What I just said about Mormons is actually true for pretty much all religions to a certain extent, as among non-convert Muslims in various parts of the planet, we can actually start to see a bit of genetic drift from different populations, such as in India, where there has been so little interreligious intermixing and marriage that South Asian Muslims have become genetically distinct from the Hindu population, and this is only partially due to gene flow from the Middle East from Islamic invaders, and mostly due to in-group preference. We can see this link between ancestry and religion with the rise of neo-pagan ethno-religions in Europe in recent years, not necessarily being due entirely to the resurgence of modern ethno-nationalism, but being very heavily correlated with it, as the rejection of Christianity or atheism signifies a shift back to ancestral veneration and traditionalism, although this isn't true for everyone who practices a neo-pagan or occultist religion, of course. So yes, all of this may sound a bit strange, but after some digging, it's easy to see the connections between religion, culture, traditions, values, languages, and ethnicity. So please let me know your thoughts on the connections not only between these aforementioned traits of humanity, but also between different religions, showing the different evolutionary paths seen for lineages and religious heritage. And for today's poll, tell me what you think the most important aspect of religion is to you. As always, thanks for watching everyone. This has been Mason, and I'll see you next time.